Jimmy Page and Ritchie Blackmore are two of the most influential guitarists in rock and roll history. Both are guitar legends. Jimmy Page has always been a super guitar hero who made kids pick up a guitar and play like him. Ritchie Blackmore talked a lot about Jimmy Page in interviews, and not many people actually know that Jimmy Page and Led Zeppelin were a great influence on Ritchie Blackmore. There's actually a 1972 interview in which Ritchie Blackmore says, "I like Jimmy Page. He's got range and vision. He's my favorite." So, how did Ritchie Blackmore first meet Jimmy Page? Actually, their paths crossed way back in the early 60s. Ritchie Blackmore first met Jimmy Page in 1962. Ritchie was about 16 years old, and Jimmy is a year older. Ritchie played in the band Screaming Lord Sutch and the Savages, and Jimmy played in Neil Christian and the Crusaders. Both bands used to play together, so that was 1962. In the mid-60s, Jimmy Page and Ritchie Blackmore worked as session guitarists. In 1965, according to Ritchie Blackmore, he played on a couple sessions with Jimmy Page. Jeff Beck played a guitar solo there, and everybody was talking about how great Jeff Beck was. Ritchie recalls that Jimmy Page looked confident, not arrogant, but confident, and he knew what he's doing. Ritchie himself felt embarrassed most of the time. Jimmy Page was very comfortable within himself, so at that point, Ritchie knew that Jimmy Page was going to be a star. But how did Jimmy Page and Led Zeppelin influence Ritchie Blackmore and Deep Purple? So, when Whole Lotta Love came out in 1969, it was a huge hit and it inspired Ritchie Blackmore a lot. Led Zeppelin 2 brought a whole new sound. Back then, Deep Purple played psychedelic pop tunes, which was very popular in the 60s, but by 1969, psychedelic music began losing its popularity. Yes, they had Mandrake Root, which was released in 1968 and sounded pretty heavy, but the main theme was nicked from Bill Parkinson, who also played with the Savages for a short while in 1966. It was originally called Lost Soul. Bill Parkinson wrote it for P.J. Proby. It was arranged for an 11-piece band and was a dynamic opening for shows. Deep Purple's Mandrake Root got that Hendrix vibe and was more of an instrumental than a vocal song. Ritchie Blackmore confessed to John Young in 1978, "I'd never written a tune before 1969. When I started feeling my way and came up with a few ideas, but at the time, we were just so over the moon about playing with good musicians." So here, Ritchie admits that Mandrake Root wasn't written by him. So, Blackmore also revealed to John Young in 1978 that he loved Led Zeppelin and Whole Lotta Love, and it changed Deep Purple's musical direction in 1969. This is what he said: "Led Zeppelin, I liked their hard approach when they came out and did Whole Lotta Love. I immediately tuned in with that type of style because before, when we were fiddling around with orchestras, I thought, something's wrong. I'm not giving all I can. Thanks to them for the inspiration." Robert Plant was the best back in those days. When Ritchie Blackmore heard Robert Plant singing, he was amazed. Blackmore said, "Why we thought we had to change singers was because of Robert Plant. We were playing at Mother's in Birmingham, and Robert got up to sing with Terry Reid. We thought, unbelievable. He was so dynamic. And the next 2 weeks we were looking for a singer, people who had Robert Plant's dynamic approach. And of course they found Ian Gillan, who was different but fantastic as well." So, Led Zeppelin and Whole Lotta Love made Deep Purple change their musical direction and record their heaviest in-rock album. They started recording it in October 1969, and the album was released on June 1970. Led Zeppelin influenced Ritchie Blackmore once again with Kashmir, and that came out in 1975. Kashmir is a progressive rock song. All four members of Led Zeppelin agreed that Kashmir is one of their best musical achievements, and they performed it at every concert after its release. On Kashmir, Led Zeppelin used orchestration. They brought in session players for the string and horn sections for the song. So, when Ritchie heard Led Zeppelin's Eastern-flavored Kashmir, he got inspired. He wrote Stargazer. Despite Blackmore's earlier no orchestra protestations in Purple, Stargazer featured the Munich Philharmonic. Blackmore's solo was in the Frisian dominant scale, used in India, Egyptian music, and flamenco. Stargazer is a progressive neoclassical heavy metal song. Ritchie Blackmore was by now a long way from heavy bluesy jams of early Purple. He paved the road for new heavy metal bands. It's amazing how many guitarists use the same old line, said Blackmore of Stargazer. They never dare touch Arabic or Turkish scales. Back in 1981, the headbanging readership of Kerrang! Magazine voted Rainbow Rising album the greatest heavy metal album ever. And its influence on Iron Maiden, power metal, neoclassical shred is just indisputable. In a 1984 interview, Ritchie Blackmore said, "It's no use just cranking up the volume and being loud. There's a trick to it. There are dynamics and certain progressions that you can play, but you don't hear much of that today. I think Van Halen are interesting. I don't particularly like them as a band, but there is a lot of movement, a lot of color to their material they produce. Led Zeppelin, too. Now they probably define the term sophisticated rock, things like Kashmir, the certain scales they would hit. That was incredible."